A lone cowboy named Wilder had not heard another soul in nearly 6 years. He lived tucked away in the sun-bleached hush of New Mexico Territory, 1864, in a land scraped raw by wind and memory, the sky that evening bled rust and ochre, stretching wide above the ridge like a warning scrawled in smoke. Dust rode low over the desert floor, swallowing every trace of the sun, rasping through brush and stone with a voice like dry bones. His cabin, weathered and silent, leaned into the slope of a shallow ridge, its plank walls stubborn against the years. 2 days east lay Dust River, too far to matter, too close to forget. Wilder split firewood by hand, callous fingers on the axe haft. The thunk of blade against stump rhythmic and final. Then came the sound, soft at first, uncertain. Footsteps, not one pair, but many, not heavy like riders, not orderly like soldiers. Fast, erratic, desperate, a voice, female, breathless, cracked at the edges, pierced the wind. This is it. That's the place. He lives here. Another answered, mocking, forget it. He ain't the saving kind. Man's been alone since the war. A third voice, frayed with exhaustion, choked on cold air. We don't need saving. Just shelter. Just one night, please. Wilder didn't flinch. He listened, watched. 5 shadows staggered into view. Young women, wind-worn and frantic, skirts ripped by scrub, boots clotted with mud, arms clinging to remnants of dignity. One dragged a broken trunk. Another held a parasol, like it might still shield her. They stopped near the porch. The tallest stepped forward. Chin raised, voice scraped raw. We got held up on the trail, she said. Headed for Silver Creek. Coachman robbed us. Left us out here. We're dancers. Not thieves. Not worse. The door stayed shut. She tried again, her voice sharp with pride she hadn't yet spent. We don't want food or favors. Just 4 walls and a roof. Another girl muttered, bitter, hopeless. Told you he wouldn't open. The tall one turned, squared her shoulders. We are not dying out here, 'cause a man's too proud to answer a knock. She raised her fist. She never touched the door. It swung open before she could. Wilder stood there, tall, broad, caked in trail dust and silence, with a face carved out of grief and a beard thick as bramble. His eyes, pale and still as winter stone, passed over each girl like a surveyor measuring land. He said nothing, just stepped back and widened the door. One by one, they entered, ducking under the frame, past a smell with smoke and rosemary and something close to warmth. No one spoke. The bold one whispered, "Thank you," but he was already turning toward the stove, as if they'd always been there. They spread out in cautious silence, onto crates, against walls near corners, as if afraid their breath might wake the walls. Only one girl remained by the door. She sat cross-legged, cradling a single ruined boot in her lap, the other still clinging to her foot, the toe gaping like a wound. She didn't speak, didn't look up. Mud flaked from her heel like old paint. She made no appeal. Wilder looked once, longer than before, then turned back to the fire. He ladled water into a blackened pot, added dried roots and meat like ritual. Still, no words, no offers, just the sound of fire crackling beneath iron and the wind clawing at the eaves. Slowly, the women surrendered the room, curling into each other, pulling coats around their shoulders, nodding off without trust but too tired for suspicion. The girl with the broken boot leaned back against the wall, eyes shut not in sleep but survival, her body braced like a door with no lock. When the soup was done, Wilder set 5 bowls on the table. No call, no gesture, just a ladle in the pot and the front door creaking closed behind him as he stepped out into the night, where the canyon wind swept clean through every hollow. Inside they rose, one by one, to eat. The last to approach was a quiet girl, Elma, though none knew her name. She took the smallest bowl, returned to her corner, and left half untouched. She set it down like it might shatter, careful, cautious, as if even silence could break something. Wilder came in after the fire dimmed. He didn't take the bed. He lay by the stove, rifle by his hand, eyes closed like a man used to ghosts. No one said good night. No one needed to. But for the first time in years, The cabin wasn't hollow. In a corner, Elma clutched her patch boot, both feet on the ground. The fire burned low, amber licking the wall like the breath of a tired spirit. The wind shifted again, brushing the windows with dry fingers that didn't knock. Inside, the silence was not peace, but aftermath. The kind of quiet earned after everything else has fallen. Wilder stirred the pot once more before dawn, offering warmth, not words. Tin mugs filled with broth. Flat hardtack split like communion. No questions asked. No names offered. Just bodies anchored in corners. Souls adrift in sleep. The girl near the stove didn't stir, knees drawn to her chest, dreaming of nothing, bracing for everything. The bold one, the girl who dared the door, who'd stood tall and spat dust in fear's eye, had collapsed against the wall like a soldier off duty, arms crossed tight against her chest, head tipped back, boots tossed in a careless heap by the door. Her breathing had fallen into a light snore, the kind only exhaustion permits, not comfort. The others, scattered across the floor like wind-blown leaves, had curled around one another or their own fears, settling into the strange hush of shelter after too many nights under stars that offered no warmth. Their bodies bore the shape of running. Shoulders hunched, limbs curled, the stiffness of souls stretched too thin. And then there was Alma. She had not inched toward the warmth of the hearth, nor joined the hush of shared relief. She had not asked for food or water or even a name. She sat apart, just outside the fire's full reach, wrapped in herself, spine pressed to the rough wall, knees drawn up tight. Her coat hung loose and thin across her shoulders, threadbare at the seams, the skirt of her dress torn near the hem where Bramble had found her. She had taken off one boot, just the right, and set it near the hearth, not too close, not begging for attention, just enough to gather a little heat. The boot was a ruined thing, the leather cracked and peeling, toe split, so wide it gaped like a mouth mid-plea, the sole curling back with exhaustion. But she never complained, never spoke, never looked up. She sat with the stillness of someone trying to disappear, to shrink herself into the smallest echo of presence. Wilder had seen, from the edge of the room, through the flicker of firelight and silence that knew how to hold itself. He watched, not with pity, not with softness, with understanding, the kind that sat deep in the bones and said nothing. When the room had quieted, when breath fell shallow and the last murmurs of broken sleep claimed them, Wilder rose. He moved without sound, knelt near the hearth, and lifted the boot. It was stiff in his hands, the dried mud breaking away in flakes. He stepped outside. The stars hung above, silent and sharp, the wind easing into stillness like a breath being held. At the basin near the well, he rolled up his sleeves, dipped cloth in cold water, and began to work. No soap, just water, just hands that knew the shape of wear. The filth came away in layers, revealing leather worn but not lost, tired but not done. When it was clean, he dried it with the sleeve of an old shirt, careful in every touch. Then inside again, beneath the low flicker lantern light, he found the tin box, pulled thread thick as cord, and a needle too dull for anything finer. He stitched, not fast, not perfect, slow even passes, the kind that hold, the kind made not to show beauty, but to make something last. Each pull of thread was like a footstep through years of silence, through loss, through all the parts of life built on leaving things behind. But this he stitched for someone else, someone who had not asked, someone whose quiet was the kind that shouted. When it was done, he set the boot back exactly where she had left it, the same angle, the same place, near the heat, but not too close, still hers, still waiting. The fire burned low. The wind died to a hush that slipped through cracks in the wall, but never touched them. Morning came slowly, gray and golden, dragging behind it the smell of ash and damp earth. One by one the girls stirred, stretched, blinked, the weight of sleep pried loose from their limbs. Alma woke last. She pushed upright slow, like rising hurt, and rubbed her arms with small, practical circles. Then she looked to the hearth. Her eyes found the boot. She reached, touched the toe. Her fingers traced the stitches. Tight, clean, new. No words came. No smile. But she didn't let go for a while. Then she pulled it on. It fit. When she stood, her steps held. No falter, no limp. She didn't search the room for him, didn't speak his name, but when he passed with muddled hot tea, and she reached out, their fingers brushed. She didn't pull away. That morning, nothing was said, but things had shifted. Wilder noticed that Alma's steps no longer dragged. Alma noticed the thread, the kind that binds without binding, that gives without price. The path to Dust River stretched before them, pale as bone and lined in the dry brush of the desert, winding through gulches and sunburnt stone. Morning rose slowly, like someone waking from grief. Wilder walked ahead, reins in hand, horse behind him, his shadow long and quiet. The 5 girls followed, not close, not in rhythm. They were not a caravan, but a line of separate stories, held together by the shape of the same night. Their clothes hung rough and misfit, their faces drawn and scorched by sun and time, yet none complained. They walked like people who knew what happened when you asked for too much. Alma walked last, not lagging, just separate. Her arms stayed wrapped around her middle, as if holding something broken in place. She stayed to the edge of the trail, never directly behind, never within the line. Her figure moved in and out of the brush, a presence half there, half passing. Wilder noticed, not obviously, not with staring, just more glances over his shoulder than necessary. He saw the way her steps slowed over uneven ground, saw and said nothing, but he adjusted his pace. She winced when the sun struck her just right, flinched not like someone afraid of light, but like someone who'd once been burned by it and hadn't forgotten. She never asked for help, not when the wind rose sharp enough to steal breath, not when the ground turned brittle and mean. Near midday it happened. They were climbing a narrow shale path, the kind where footing forgot how to hold, slope rising cruel on one side, the drop on the other whispering promises of ruin. The others moved carefully, single file, breath shallow, hands brushing stone for balance. Alma, always last, stepped on a loose rock. Her boot slid, her ankle gave, not violently, but just enough, and she pitched forward, catching herself with her palms on gravel sharp enough to draw blood. She didn't cry out, didn't curse, just stopped, breath locked in her chest, body frozen in that strange moment where pain introduced itself and waited to be acknowledged. Wilder had already turned before the others even noticed. He didn't hurry. His steps were measured, steady, as if the ground beneath him dared not move. He knelt beside her, his voice calm as rain. "You all right?" Alma didn't answer. She didn't look at him. She pushed herself upright, dusted her hands against her skirt like it owed her something, and reached for her boot, which had twisted on her ankle but held. Her fingers trembled as she tried to straighten it. He offered a hand, open, waiting, no pressure behind it. She stared for a breath too long. Then, instead of taking a hold, she reached out with only 2 fingers, just enough to steady herself, as if even in injury she refused to lean on more than she had to. He closed his hand gently around hers, lifted her to her feet without pulling, and when she stood, she let go without ceremony. "Thank you," she murmured, so low it barely reached his ears. He gave one quiet nod and turned away, as if nothing had changed, but both of them knew something had. That night, they found shelter in a hollowed-away station, all that remained of some old trail mark, a sagging shack, and a fire pit ringed with stones char-black by older storms. Wilder gathered while the girls unrolled bedrolls, their limbs heavy with the weight of dirt and dusk. Alma, true to form, sat apart, but closer now, close enough for the fire to catch her cheeks, for the light to touch her without needing to stretch far. Wilder split wood with clean, practiced swings. Alma fetched a dented pot, filled it with water from a battered canteen, dropped in dried beans and a wild herb she plucked near the riverbank. They worked in tandem, side by side, saying nothing, needing nothing spoken. When the pot began to boil, steam curling upward in fragile ribbons, she dipped a tin cup, filled it, and turned. He was sitting nearby, mending the cracked strap of his saddle, fingers busy, eyes down. She stood there for a breath, then crossed the fire quietly and held the cup out, both hands wrapped around it with deliberate steadiness. He looked up. She didn't meet his eyes, but when he reached to take it, her hands brushed his, and she didn't pull away. Not quickly, For the first time, she gave something. Not out of debt, not for kindness returned, just given. He accepted it, tipped the cup in thanks, drank deep. When he handed it back, she was still there, still close. She turned without a word and returned to her place by the fire. But this time, when she unrolled her blanket, it was not at the far edge of camp. It was beside his horse, where the ground still held warmth. No one mentioned the fall. No one asked what passed between them. But Wilder watched in the shadows as she lay down, and in that watching, his shoulders softened just enough to feel it. They weren't lovers. Not yet. They weren't even friends. But they were no longer strangers walking in opposite directions. Sometimes, that's how the real things begin. 2 days from Silver Creek, Alma began to cough. At first it was nothing, just a dry rasp lost in the whisper of wind or the jostle of boots on loose stone. But it didn't fade. She turned from the others when it came, buried it in her sleeve, but Wilder noticed. He noticed everything. The way her lips lost color, the way her steps lost rhythm. She wrapped tighter at night, arms around ribs, sleep pulled tight as a trap. Her eyes glassed over. She stopped eating. When she drank, her hands shook, and still she said nothing. Still she didn't complain. By the time Dust River rose in the distance, a sprawl of low roofs and slanting porches, Alma was pale and soaked in sweat. Despite the dry air, the others dragged themselves forward, more interested in beds and questions. Wilder led them to the inn, its sign swinging crooked, its paint long peeled by wind. He tied the horse, turned, caught Alma as she staggered once, then again, then dropped to the porch step like her body had decided the journey was over. The girls cried out, startled, but Wilder was already moving. He reached her before her head struck wood, lifted her like a man used to carrying weight that didn't fight back. Her skin was hot beneath his arms. He didn't shout, didn't break stride. He turned across the street to the weathered building with the chip sign that read Doc Harland, paint faded to bone white. Inside, the air smelled of tobacco smoke and sweat and camphor. The doctor looked up from a book no one had read in years. "She's burning," Wilder said flatly. The doctor nodded, already pushing to his feet. "Back room. Lay her down." Wilder carried her in, settled her on the cot like she was made of glass, careful not to let her head jolt. She whimpered once, small, hoarse, then went still. Doc Harlan lifted her wrist, checked her throat, pressed a callous hand to her chest. "How long she been like this?" he asked, voice low. "Started coughing 3 days back. Hasn't eaten since yesterday." She talked before that. Wilder hesitated. His jaw tightened. The doctor nodded slowly, expression tight as his fingers probed beneath her jawline, pressing gently against the swollen edge of her throat. "She's had a serious case of laryngitis," he murmured, voice low but laced with concern. "Fever's high, lungs sound rough." His touch slowed as he tapped lightly near her voice box. "But this is old damage." Wilder's eyes narrowed, his gaze sharpening with sudden stillness. "She was born like that." The doctor gave a slow shake of his head. "No, this is trauma. Someone struck her. Hard. Repeatedly. Enough to damage the windpipe. You crush a voice like this when you don't want someone to scream." Silence filled the space between them, thick and pressing, as if the room itself recoiled from the truth. Wilder sat down heavily on the edge of a crate near the wall, hat clenched in both hands, fingers curled white against the brim. He didn't curse, didn't move, just stared at the cracked wall boards like they might speak back, like they owed him a name. The doctor softened his tone, watching him with something close to respect. "She's not gone, son. Her voice might come back, if she rests, stays warm. Give her time. Might be weeks, might be months. Depends on her body and her will." Wilder glanced toward the cot where Alma lay shivering beneath a thin sheet, her breath coming in short, fractured pulls, her lips parted just enough to let the air pass through, her hands twitching each time she exhaled. "If I take her somewhere quiet," he said, voice low and level. "Sunlight, real food, no one asking her anything. Will that help?" The doctor nodded once. "It'll help." Wilder stood without another word. "I'll take her back with me. Tonight." And so at dawn, with the mist still clinging to ground and the scent of dust and wet wood in the air, Wilder stood on the inn porch with Alma cradled gently in his arms, wrapped in his coat like she was made of breath and bones too light to hold weight. She hadn't woken fully, but the fire in her skin had dulled, her cheeks flushed pink not with fever now, but with life creeping back in. Behind the window, the other girls watched in silence, eyes tracking every step. They didn't stop him. No one did, but the town saw. Near the saloon, two men leaned on a porch post, squinting. "Ain't that the Apache girl from last week?" one muttered. "He's carrying her like she's a bride." Another near the barber's bench spat tobacco, shook his head. "Poor bastard. Alone 6 years, and now he's bringing in strays." The wheels creaked. The town faded behind them, and they rolled east beneath a sun that watched but didn't judge. At the cabin, wind moved soft through the red dust and low juniper, whispering along the roof as if welcoming her in. Wilder laid Alma in the bed beneath the east window, where the morning light slanted gold across the wooden floorboards. She could not speak, could barely sit up, her hands too unsteady to lift even a spoon. The first time she tried, it slipped and clattered to the floor. She winced, recoiled like she expected a hand or a shout. Wilder said nothing, just picked it up, blew on the broth, and fed her slowly without demand, without question. When she turned away, he didn't coax. He simply set the bowl aside, tucked the blanket tighter, and sat beside her until her eyes closed again. Each day, he simmered broth over the fire, adding roots, dried meat, sometimes the smallest piece of potato. When she could not eat, he drew little sketches on scraps of old newspaper, carrots, beans, a steaming bowl. She sometimes pointed, sometimes she didn't look. At night, when her cough came back, deep and tearing, he didn't rush in. He waited. If she knocked once, he entered quietly, set a cup of warm water on the table, and left without a word. He never hovered. He gave her space and stayed in it. On the 4th day, she sat up longer, leaned into pillows. One morning, she looked toward the old rocking chair near the hearth. She didn't point, didn't gesture, but he saw, said nothing, just lifted her in his arms, her fingers curling loosely into his shirt, and carried her to it. He draped a quilt across her knees and placed a book in her lap. She couldn't read it, not really, but she opened it, touched the words with the tip of her finger, as if remembering what it was to speak. That afternoon, as Wilder sat on the porch mending a cracked bridle strap, Alma shuffled quietly to the table. She wrote something on a torn slip of paper and left it on his plate. When he came in, he found it folded beneath the spoon. "I am not my past. You treat me like I'm a person, not a wound." He read it once, then looked up. She sat across from him, hands folded in her lap, gaze calm and clear. Wilder nodded, voice soft. "Only the living have passed," he said. "The dead don't carry anything." She smiled then, small, gentle, real. That night, he left the lamp burning longer than usual, just in case she wanted to write again. And Alma, for the first time, slept not like someone hiding, but like someone healing. The days grew quieter in Wilder's cabin, but fuller. Alma moved more now, tending the fire, folding blankets, sorting herbs beside the window where the light came in like music. She still hadn't spoken, but the silence felt different, lighter, like a room with a window cracked open. Then, on a gray morning stitched with wind, the past returned. Wilder had ridden into Dust River to trade, flowers, salt, matches, and left Alma a note by the hearth. Back by sundown, it read in careful block letters. She stood in the doorway after he left, one hand on the frame, watching the trail until even the dust from his horse disappeared.